Job hunting while trans. Things I have to think about that you don't. Hey everybody, it's Alistair, aka that pesky social worker, and I wanted to talk to you about, as I just said, job hunting while trans, because today I'm actually getting ready to start my new job, and this is something that I've been kind of quiet about for a few different reasons. If you happen to be in the trans, GNC, non-binary sort of umbrella, you're gonna understand a lot of this stuff. If you happen to be cis, which means you're not trans, which means you agree that whatever gender you were assigned with birth you feel comfortable with, this is something that you probably haven't had to think about before. So, as a social worker, I have to go through a little bit of a more rigorous, I guess, vetting process, if you would want to say, when I get hired for a job, just because of what I do, because I work with people. Typically, this means background checks, drug screens, when I started working at the health system that I worked in up in Maine, I had to have 5 references just to get in the door. And then I had 3 more interviews on top of that. So it's pretty, I wouldn't say hard to get in the door, but there's definitely a lot more of a rigorous check into who you are. And as some of you are probably familiar with if you work in the human services field, background checks are very much a thing that usually get run, especially if you work with children, especially if you work with the elderly. There's very few human services jobs and social work jobs where you don't have to have a background check unless you're a private practice person, I guess. And even then, I think you still have to submit to the state certain documentation. So I wanted to talk about that process specifically, the background check. So as I've shared before, I have had my name changed. My first, middle, and last name have all been changed legally. I have not changed my birth certificate. That's a conversation for a separate day. But one of the things that I have a lot of anxiety over is when background checks have to be run. And it's not because I've been arrested or done anything wrong, because nothing ever comes back. I have no criminal history because I like being able to do my job, and I've been able to make good informed choices and not been in trouble with the law. So that's not something that I'm particularly concerned about. What I am concerned about is my name change showing up on my background check. Back in the day, early transition, and when I say early transition, I mean 7 years ago, before I was really 100% out, before I had started taking hormones, before a lot of this stuff, as many trans people do, I was using my name, but still had to put down my birth name because of the lack of paperwork change. And I know for a fact that there were a lot of jobs that I was turned down from because I had 2 different names. And this is even before background checks, because you had to just write it out. And whenever it comes up on a background check, when they ask, have you gone by any other names, I always have such anxiety whenever I see that question. Because if you do your reading and background checks, depending on what kind of background check they're doing, sometimes name changes show up and sometimes they don't. Now, part of the reason they even ask if you've gone by another name is that sometimes if somebody has committed a crime, they will change their name. So that way they're hoping that, their record won't follow them. In my case, it's more the fact of I don't really want my identity out there unless I'm willing to have that conversation with people. I don't want somebody stumbling upon that. And because I never really know what background check process people are using, I'm never sure if it shows up. Now, there have been times where, especially when I was younger, I used to put my old name down, my birth name. I don't call it a dead name, but that's, again, a separate topic for a different day. So I don't put down my birth name anymore. I don't even indicate that I've had a name change. That also creates a large amount of anxiety because, what if they run the background check and it is one of the ones that show, oh, well, he used to have a different name and it's way different than the one he has now. And it's a pretty obviously female name. I've had a few people come across Alistair and not have seen it before and assume that that might also be a female name. It's not. It's fine. People make mistakes. Email is typically how that happens, but people make interesting judgment calls. I just assume everybody's gender neutral unless pronouns are specifically stated. It's just a general rule of thumb for me. So, as a trans person having to apply for a job, this is something I have to think about a lot. Am I going to lose this job because I changed my name and I didn't declare it and I didn't talk about why? The only other people that I can think of off the top of my head that might have to deal with this would be folks who were divorced and changed their last name. And then typically, I know that sometimes people put that down, sometimes people don't. And when I was getting my name changed on everything after I'd had the legal process done, I remember going to the bank and trying to get my name changed there. And I was talking with a woman, the bank teller, and saying, "Yeah, I have my name change decree. Here's my paperwork. Please change my name." And she was asking me why I had changed my name. And it's kind of befuddled. And I kind of just politely looked at her and I said, "Why does it matter?" And she said, "Oh, well, depending on what it is, if it was like divorce or something, we have to file that a special way." Which to me reads as some bullshit. To me, that's just somebody being invasively curious because I highly doubt there really is a whole separate filing process. If you work in a bank system and there is a separate filing process, call me out. As an outside person hearing that and seeing that, that just tells me that you're just being nosy. Um, and this is something that I come into a lot when it comes to just jobs and that general anxiety of, are people going to find out? Am I going to lose this job because I have different names? Other than my names being radically different, like my birth name and the name I have now, there's not really a whole lot to indicate that I'm trans unless I'm really talking to you about it or people happen to stumble across my profile, which is another thing that I have to be concerned about to a certain extent because I have a public platform. I also have a private account that I haven't touched in a month and a half, mostly because I've been trying to concentrate my efforts here because I feel like this is more productive than talking to people that I know, love, and care about me and agree with me on a lot of things. And when I step onto this platform, it's more of trying to reach people that haven't seen me, that don't know who I am, that haven't heard what I had to say or have to say, and trying to provide some education. The reality is that more people have access to Wi-Fi than they do a counselor, and I think that that's just aberrant and horrible. So part of my mission in all of this is to be able to provide information about myself, my life, my education, and put it out there for people. That comes with a certain level of risk because I have made the decision to openly talk on this platform about being trans. And while, there's legislation that has passed that's saying, LGBTQ protections in the workplace, anybody in any kind of minority situation in a hiring position can tell you that they've lost a job based on that. It's hard to prove. Excuse me, it's hard to prove. Uh, it happens, and you know it when it happens, and it's incredibly painful when it happens. I've lost about 5 jobs to having different names, which is why at this point I don't even put down that I had a different name. And if they call me up and ask me about it, then I have that conversation. But honestly, it hasn't happened. I've been really lucky for the most part that hasn't been an issue. And the handful of other places where I've had to have background checks run prior to entering social work, I knew the people that were in the human resources department, so I knew that it wasn't going to be an issue. So the next time you find yourself in a position where you're applying for a job, and you happen to be a cis person, I really want you to pay attention to the process of what kind of information you're being asked to give, because there are some people who are able to transition in some ways, but not in others. Meaning, so for example, in the state of Tennessee, you cannot alter your birth certificate. You cannot. It is not possible. If your name and your gender are written down, that's what it's going to be. Virginia is a little different. In order for me to start that process, I actually have to put forth 2 separate court motions, and it's going to cost a couple $100s that I don't have. So when people talk about transition, it's more than suddenly just changing your name, getting a new wardrobe, and taking hormones. There's a whole lot more to it. The legal aspect of this, the paperwork aspect, is ridiculous. And it's a huge barrier to transition for a lot of people because, it might be that they're able to find a clinic that, if they want to have hormone replacement therapy, they might be able to find a clinic that can support that. The odds of being able to afford what it costs to have your name changed on everything, which is a lot. I mean, the process, just to gloss over it very quickly, Social Security office, DMV, bank, and then anything else, all your credit cards, your mailing address, like all that stuff has to be changed. And you have to wait in steps for all of this. And even before you go to the Social Security office, for me, I had to file a document with my local court for a name change decree, which depending on where you live, sometimes you actually have to go to court. Where I live, a judge just looks at the petition and then says yay or nay. And that's again an anxiety ridden process because you're sitting there wondering, oh my God, am I going to get like this really transphobic judge isn't going to give this to me, when it clearly states the reasons that they wouldn't grant a name change is if you have a criminal record, or you've basically just something having to do with incarceration technically is why they wouldn't give it to you. But you still don't know who's going to be looking at those documents. And having to face those women at the courthouse when I was submitting my petition was really difficult because they're reading it and they're looking at my ID and they're looking at me. And then they're just like, okay. And it's like, I can just see all of the wheels turning. And I know that I'm not the first trans person to have walked into my local courthouse and done this, because I know I'm not the only trans person in my county. I also know that there aren't a whole lot of us, so it's not a frequent occurrence. And people like to take that moment to sort of absorb and observe the person in front of them, which feels really scrutinizing and very vulnerable, especially when you're putting, your identity down on a document and saying, please legally recognize me as who I am. And if you've ever been in a position where you've had to do that, whether it's because of, your name, your gender, your immigration status, anything like that, that's a terrifying process. It's hard enough when you have to ask to be seen just on a human level, and then to be asked to be seen on a piece of paper on a legal level is even harder. So for, again, folks that are not trans that are applying for jobs, the next time you find yourself in the job application process, I would encourage you to take a minute and think about what it would be like if your documents didn't match, if you didn't have your paperwork in order, and how much you think that would keep you from getting a job. Because if you start looking at job applications from a different perspective of having gone through all of these various hoops, it gets a lot scarier. There's also a reason that the unemployment rates for trans people are as high as they are. I would very, very, very strongly encourage you, if you have not already come across it, to look up the Transgender Discrimination Survey. It was published in, I believe, 2015. Has some very, very wonderful information in it. I'm going to be making another video maybe tomorrow about some of the stats around that, from employment and sort of just general discrimination that trans people face, because most people have a general understanding that things aren't super great for us trans folks, but I don't think there's a really full understanding until people have the data, like, here. And even then, there are some people that are like, oh, this data, but like, oh, you have this other lived experience, so I'm just going to ignore that. And that's not helpful or productive at all. So that's my spiel for this morning. I hope that everybody has a good Monday morning. If you are working, I hope that you have a good work day. If you're not, I hope you are enjoying it. And I will check in with you all tomorrow.